Knispel was Nazi Germany's deadliest tank ace. 168 confirmed kills, more than any other Panzer commander in the Reich. He was also the propaganda ministry's worst nightmare. He looked nothing like the Aryan superman plastered on recruitment posters. Filthy, unshaven, hair like a wild animal, tattoos inked beneath the torn tunic. He brawled with SS guards and aimed pistols at their heads. His commanders begged for him to be awarded the Knight's Cross. Hitler's inner circle refused. Too valuable to execute, too defiant to celebrate. They did the only thing they could, unleash him on the Eastern Front, where his savage, unshaven face would be the last thing Soviet tank crews ever saw. The Polish border trembled as hundreds of tanks rolled into the nation. It was September 1st, 1939, and Adolf Hitler had just unleashed his war machine against Europe. The tanks drove straight into Poland's hastily assembled lines. Cannon fire tore through trenches and barricades, sending defenders scattering into broken formations. Wehrmacht infantry followed close behind, sweeping through the gaps and encircling the stunned Polish troops, crushing them without mercy. Most of the tanks were Panzer I and II models, light, fast, and lethal. Their primary weapons lacked the brute force of later designs, but made up for it with speed and coordination with other Wehrmacht forces. If they were to run into a particularly tough stronghold, they would quickly be reinforced by aerial attacks carried out by the Luftwaffe and ground assaults led by soldiers who fought as war machines themselves, according to Polish witnesses. Nobody knew at the time, but they were under the influence of pervitin, an early form of methamphetamine that dulled exhaustion and gave troops the ability to operate day and night without rest. There was little the Poles could do as the German tanks rolled into view of the capital. Some men dropped their rifles and fled. Others faced the metal beasts with whatever they had at hand, desperate to halt the advance. Still, by October 6th, Poland had been conquered, and the swastika flew over the buildings of Warsaw as the Führer marched across its shattered streets, saluting the men who had brought an entire country to its knees in just over a month. Far away, in the recently annexed Czechoslovakian region of Sudetenland, a young German named Knispel heard the news. At just 17, he completed his training as an automobile technician, but deep down, he knew that factory life would never suit him. He didn't want to fix machines. He wanted to ride inside one of those fire-breathing tanks that had destroyed Poland. As Hitler's war spread like wildfire across Europe, Knispel made his choice. He would join the armored forces of the Wehrmacht, riding into battle at the head of Hitler's tank legions. Knispel began his training in 1940, but before he could even lay his hands on a tank's controls, he had to march with the rest of Hitler's army. Like every Wehrmacht recruit, he was drilled in the fundamentals: Nazi-style salutes, parade ground discipline, and weapons proficiency with pistols, rifles, and grenades. He could dismantle, fire, and reload Carabiner 98K and P-38s in his sleep. However, he had a harder time adjusting to the Nazi ideology. While most parroted Hitler's aggressive rhetoric against non-Germans and abided by the rigid grooming standards expected of the Aryan gentleman, Knispel stood apart. His long, unkempt hair and scruffy goatee seemed almost an insult to Hitler's commanders. He wore his tattoos proudly, didn't bark slogans, and had little patience for brutality against civilians. He followed orders, but only to a point, and beneath the uniform, Knispel remained his own man. He wasn't the type of Nazi soldier officers were excited about having in their midst. Still, even the most hardened commanders had to admit, the kid could fight. He mastered the Panzer I and II with ease, graduating to one of the earlier versions of the Panzer IV. Weighing somewhere under 20 tons, and armed with a short-barreled 75mm KWK-37 L-24 cannon, ideal for smashing fortifications and infantry positions. It carried roughly 80 to 100 shells, supported by 2 MG-34 machine guns with 3,000 rounds, offering solid all-around firepower. On the training fields, his innate talents became evident. He was quick to spot threats, fast to load, and dead-on accurate when calling out coordinates. He could read the rhythm of the battlefield like a maestro, knowing exactly when to strike and when to vanish into the smoke. However, no matter how effective he proved in drills, Something about him made the brass hesitate to put him behind the cannon. Maybe it was his disregard for the pomp. Maybe it was old-school Nazi bureaucracy resisting anyone who didn't fit the mold. Whatever the reason, they didn't trust him with the trigger. When he finally received orders for deployment, it wasn't as a gunner. Instead, he was placed in the tank as a loader. It wasn't precisely what he'd signed up for. Still, he took the role without protest. His first deployment would take him to the Eastern Front, where the Nazis were getting ready to stab a former ally in the back during the largest land invasion in history. Kurt Knispel rolled into the Soviet Union during Operation Barbarossa as part of the 12th Panzer Division on June 22, 1941. He joined a force of more than 3,000 tanks and nearly 4 million troops, tasked with bringing Joseph Stalin's nation crashing down before even issuing a formal declaration of war. The Panzer formations hoped to wipe out the hastily constructed defenses ahead, just as they had done in Poland 2 years before. Knispel's tank fired its first live rounds at waves of exposed infantry caught in the open. The shells tore through columns of foot soldiers, leaving no chance for retaliation. The Soviets deployed their prize T-34s and KV-1s, far superior in armor and firepower to Germany's older models. But Hitler's forces had been trained to strike with a ferocity that not even the Red Army's finest could hold for long. In some clashes, over 800 Soviet tanks were lost in less than a week, falling victim to both the strikes of their rival tanks and aerial bombings, courtesy of the Luftwaffe bombers circling above. However, the deeper the Germans drove, the harder conditions became. The Soviet Union was an entirely different beast from anything Hitler's forces had conquered before. Roads vanished into swamps, mud clung to treads like glue, and no matter how many men and tanks the Germans wiped out from the battlefield, there were always 100 more ready to take their place. German troops fell prey to exhaustion, while tanks' fuel and ammunition supplies began to run dangerously low. It meant there was no room for mistakes. Every single shot had to count. Every skill had to be exploited. As a result, in spite of his unorthodox appearance and disregard for Nazi decorum, Knispel was reassigned as gunner under Lieutenant Hellman. There were no objections. Every crew member knew he was their best chance of making it out of Stalin's empire alive. Still fresh from his promotion, Knispel was assigned to a column moving toward Leningrad, where the offensive had stalled under relentless Soviet fire. Knispel pointed his toward the city ahead, but before he could fire, a Soviet shell found him first. The German tank trembled under the weight of the impact, and the crew rushed to climb out before the finishing shot came. Yet Knispel remained inside. He rushed to scan the burning landscape through the periscope. It was only smoke and haze, but then he noticed something. A shadow, moving his way, locked onto Knispel's exposed flank. It was a Soviet T-34, and it was about to pounce. Knispel threw himself into the controls, alone, guiding the half-crippled machine into firing position as the Soviet gun inched closer. He wasn't sure he had the enemy lined up, but it was now or never. He fired. A shell exploded from his cannon and flew through the battlefield, straight into the T-34's turret. A burst of flame erupted from the Soviet tank as it collapsed. Knispel had just claimed his first tank. In the months that followed, the young tank gunner had carved a reputation for himself, racking up 7 more victories against Soviet armor. But as winter descended on the Eastern Front, the momentum of Operation Barbarossa froze. The German advance stalled in the face of unbreakable resistance and the merciless cold that seized engines and shattered morale. Knispel was pulled back to Germany. There, he had time to recover, but just briefly, as the Reich already had plans for its promising tanker. After months of fighting against the Soviets, it had become evident that the T-34s and KV-1s were too tough for earlier Panzer models to crack head-on. The Germans responded with an upgrade. The new Panzer IV Model G, which began to roll in early 1942, was now equipped with a 75mm KWK-40 L-43 long-barrel cannon, capable of punching through even the thickest Soviet armor. With this weapon under his command, Knispel was redeployed, this time to the plains of Ukraine. Before Knispel and his comrades reached the front, the unit made a stop in occupied Poland, where Soviet prisoners of war were being transported like cattle. It's said that as Knispel descended from the train, taking the German troops toward the battlefront, he heard a scream ripping through the rail yard. Knispel turned toward the commotion and saw an SS guard beating a Soviet prisoner. While most soldiers turned away, Knispel stepped forward and, against orders, threw himself between the SS brute and his victim. The guard barked a warning, but Knispel didn't care and instead drew his sidearm, leveling it at the SS guard's head. The SS guard lunged, fists flew between both men. Before military police rushed in, Knispel had already managed to pin the man to the train tracks. It's unclear if the guard survived or was just badly injured, but whatever the outcome was, the incident severely damaged the already thin patience the Wehrmacht held for this Nazi rebel. Yet once again, his talent saved him. Instead of being court-martialed or executed, Knispel was ordered back onto the train and deployed to Ukraine. Because no matter how much of a rebel he was, Germany still needed his skill at the front. Kurt Knispel did not disappoint in Ukraine, increasing his victory score to 12. According to journalist Jacinto Anton, Knispel was, quote, so good he could fire without the tank commander's permission. However, not even a tank ace like himself could shift the tide of the battle on his own. Every Soviet asset eliminated cost the Wehrmacht dearly, and for every tank Knispel destroyed, German forces lost dozens. His own unit was eventually outflanked and nearly encircled before executing a desperate withdrawal under fire. The Panzer IV had reached its limit. However, the Germans were already working on a new machine. Back in Germany, Knispel was presented with the Tiger I. It was unlike anything the battlefield had seen. At 56 tons, it was a giant, bristling with an 88mm KWK-36 gun, capable of sending both armor-piercing and high-explosive shells. Its rounds could punch through a T-34's hull like a blade through paper, or blast infantry into dust with a single shot. Despite its massive weight, the Tiger moved with surprising speed, reaching 28 miles per hour, and capable of handling rough terrain with ease, thanks to its extra-wide 725mm tracks that chewed through mud, snow, and rubble alike. As Knispel trained on board this new beast, he quickly rose above the rest. His hands danced over the controls as if he already knew the Tiger's weight, recoil, and the pressure needed to shatter enemy armor by instinct alone. In drills, he outperformed every other tanker, and when the time came to return to the Soviet Union, Knispel's Tiger was already locked and loaded. Now a member of the elite 503rd Heavy Panzer Battalion, Kurt Knispel was nearing legendary status, and as he rolled into Soviet terrain once more, even experienced comrades couldn't deny there was something about Knispel no other gunner had. As a fellow tanker would put it, quote, no one could come close to Kurt, and we acknowledged that without envy. It was a special gift that made him capable of these feats. On July 5th, 1943, this gift was put to the limit as Knispel helped launch Operation Citadel, the German offensive aimed at smashing through the Soviet stronghold at Kursk, a bulging salient fortified with some of the fiercest defenders the Red Army could muster. The advance was treacherous from the start. German tanks, including Knispel's Tiger, had to crawl across ruined bridges that collapsed into swollen rivers, inch through terrain riddled with deep anti-tank ditches, and push through muddy ravines engineered to trap moving armor. As the Germans neared the edge of the salient, Knispel spotted a T-34, positioned about a mile away, its turret slowly swiveling toward the German column. It was well beyond ideal firing range, but driving closer would mean exposing the entire battalion to enemy fire. Before anyone had a chance to understand what was happening, a crack echoed across the entire field, and a cloud of smoke rose into the skies. The Soviet tank was gone, ripped apart by a perfectly landed shell fired by Knispel in a split-second decision. Knispel had just realized the full potential of his Tiger, and would make sure to exploit it to the limit. Over the next few days, Knispel became one of the most feared executioners on the battlefield. His shells obliterated 7 more Soviet tanks, some of them positioned as far as 6,500 feet away from him, their crews unaware they were even being targeted. He weaved through shattered villages, dodging artillery and tank fire, firing through smoke and debris. Whenever enemy columns were spotted in the distance, Knispel didn't wait for orders, and instead rushed to meet them with cannon fire. His commander, Alfred Rebel, later recalled, quote, "Knispel's vigilance never relaxed. Whether by night or day, he commanded the entire battlefield within his field of vision. Even before I could give the order to fire, Knispel had already fired and destroyed the enemy tank with 1 shot." However, as Knispel neared the salient he had been tasked to secure, he realized the battle was just getting started. Over 5,000 Soviet tanks were advancing toward the Germans, guns primed. Even for Kurt Knispel, this was too much. The Germans had misjudged the Red Army's resolve for the last time. After years of brutal warfare, the Soviets were ready to counter just about anything Hitler's troops could throw their way. And as Knispel and his fellow tanks prepared to seize the Kursk salient, the fiercest defense the Nazis had yet encountered took form before them. The clash became known as the Battle of Kursk, and it would go down as the largest tank battle in history. Over 10,000 armored vehicles rumbled across the battlefield as they clashed across open fields and shattered villages. Within days, the landscape had been destroyed beyond recognition. The Germans knew this was a fight they couldn't win. Retreat was the only option. Kurt Knispel's mission changed in an instant. From leading the charge, he was now tasked with guiding rescue operations. Entire units of German troops were being cut off and swallowed by the encircling Soviet horde. Only Knispel and his fellow tankers could punch a hole wide enough for them to escape. On July 16th, Knispel rushed to save the remnants of the SS Kavallerie Brigade Fegelein, Hitler's elite mounted paramilitary unit. As his Tiger tank crested a ridge, he spotted Soviet armor closing in on the trapped cavalry. The enemy was distant, but by now Knispel was an expert at long-distance strikes. With calm precision, he turned his turret, sighted the target, and fired. The shell flew across nearly 10,000 feet of battlefield and punched through the Soviet tank's armor. It was believed to be the longest confirmed tank kill of his career. The shock of the strike stalled the Soviet advance just long enough, allowing the SS cavalry and the rest of the German troops trapped in the encirclement to make it out in one piece. After their loss at the Battle of Kursk, the Germans slowly started to lose their momentum as Soviet forces steamrolled through weakened German lines, and Allied forces hit the beaches of Normandy, opening a second front that fractured the Nazi war machine. Yet amid the Empire's collapse, Kurt Knispel's career just kept picking up. Every time he was dispatched to reinforce crumbling flanks or delay Soviet breakthroughs, he left a trail of destroyed enemy armor behind. Alongside his crew, Knispel would often engage waves of Soviet tanks head-on and emerge without so much as a scratch on his tank. It's reported that during the Battle of Korsun-Cherkazy in the Soviet Union, the Tigers in Knispel's unit were credited with destroying over 200 Soviet tanks, even as the Germans were forced to surrender ground. By early 1944, his tally had reportedly surpassed 100, earning him the Tank Assault Badge in gold. His name was also broadcast across Nazi Germany during the nightly Wehrmachtbericht, the High Command's program that praised only the most exceptional warriors of the Reich. Knispel was the only non-commissioned officer in Germany's entire armored force to receive such an honor. But despite his soaring victory count and multiple recommendations from superior officers, Knispel was never granted the Knight's Cross of the Iron Cross, the most prestigious military decoration within Nazi Germany. It's believed that Knispel didn't fit the image of Hitler's ideal soldier. His quiet defiance of the regime's authoritarian expectations made him a liability in the eyes of Nazi propaganda officials who weren't eager to showcase a war hero who refused to be a poster boy. This man was not who they envisioned standing next to the Führer as he was awarded the Knight's Cross. Not that Knispel cared. Those who knew him said he wasn't in it for medals, and more than once he credited his victories to fellow tankers, letting others enjoy the recognition for a change. For him, the battle was what mattered, and the best award he could get was a tank upgrade. And by June 1944, he was bound for another one, the Tiger II. Nicknamed the Königstiger, or the King Tiger, this was a hybrid of power and armor, merging the sloped silhouette of the Panther with nearly impenetrable plating said to withstand over 20 direct hits. Armed with an 88mm KWK-43 L-71 cannon, the King Tiger could destroy enemy tanks from over a mile away, making it the tank no one wanted to meet on the battlefield. With this new weapon, Knispel thundered back to the Eastern Front, cutting through Soviet formations across Hungary, raising his victory tally to 126 confirmed victories, earning his spot as the deadliest tank ace in the Third Reich. By 1945, the writing was on the wall. Germany was losing the war. But Kurt Knispel was not built to surrender, and if the Reich had only one more day left, he was determined to spend it inside his tank. Knispel continued to defy the impossible. Some reports claim he took out 24 enemy vehicles in a single engagement. But by April, with the Red Army flooding into Central Europe, Knispel became one of only 8 Tiger tanks remaining in the decimated 503rd Heavy Panzer Battalion. Their retreat led them to the Czech town of Verbovec on April 28th. There, with smoke hanging low over the town and the ground trembling beneath the weight of Soviet armor, Knispel, newly promoted to Feldwebel, prepared for one final stand. Flanked by the last surviving German tanks, Knispel charged into the Soviet formation ahead. He opened fire, blasting through the haze, even as shells slammed into his Tiger II's armor with bone-rattling force. But still he advanced, eyes locked through the gun sight. He weaved between the burning wrecks of friendly tanks, coaxing every last breath of speed from his machine. Then, through the smoke, he spotted a Soviet tank that had broken formation, exposed and vulnerable. Knispel's hands flew to the controls. He adjusted his aim, drew a breath, and pulled the trigger. It was a direct hit. He had just claimed his 168th takedown. And it would be his final one. Dozens of Soviet tanks surrounded him, every turret swiveling in his direction. It was over, and Knispel knew it. Still, if this was to be his last breath, he would spend it doing what he loved most. He fired one last round. The Tiger's cannon bellowed a final time before a storm of return fire answered in unison. 10 days later, Germany surrendered. The Third Reich had fallen, and with it, the best German tanker that ever lived.